At 6:30 in the morning, Valor Athletics was still cold. The overhead lights flickered on in quiet rows, revealing a pristine floor of interlocking mats that stretched from wall to wall. In the far corner, a woman moved slowly, guiding a mop in steady lines. Her sweatshirt was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves bunched at the elbows, and her gray sweatpants were baggy enough to hide the shape of her legs. Claire Martinez didn't look up as the front doors opened. The first wave of attendees entered with the kind of presence that belonged in this building. Sharp tracksuits, duffel bags with brand names stitched in gold, water bottles customized with championship decals. These were not hobbyists. These were the grinders, the medal chasers, and the self-styled kings of the mat. And Claire, kneeling near the edge with a spray bottle and a folded towel, did not exist in their world. A pair of coaches strolled by, deep in conversation. One glanced down, took in the sight of her crouched over a patch of mat tape, and kept walking. His voice carried without apology. "She's got the hardest job in the building. Better hope she gets under the mirrors, too. Nobody wants to smell yesterday's sweat at a seminar." Claire didn't flinch. She tightened the towel in her hand and wiped a streak along the edge of the mat. Her knuckles were pale, but her grip was relaxed. A young competitor walked in next, slapping hands with a teammate before pointing toward Claire. "Did they bring in volunteers for this one?" "That's new." His teammate chuckled, adjusting the strap on his shoulder brace. "At least she's warmed up. Maybe she'll teach us the mop sweep." The jokes weren't cruel, not really, just careless, tossed into the air like pennies that never needed to land. Claire continued across the floor without comment. Each pass of the mop left behind a gleaming line. Every corner was done twice. She moved as if the gym were empty. The Valor Athletics logo was printed across the central wall in bold navy letters, surrounded by framed photos of national champions and black belt instructors. Underneath that wall, Claire paused and refolded the towel on her shoulder, eyes tracing the photos for a beat before she turned back to the mop bucket. One of the newer students, maybe a college wrestler, watched her for a second too long before muttering, "They could have at least given her a shirt with the gym name. Looks like she wandered in from the parking lot." The woman at the front desk, who had been checking registrations with a clipboard and tight efficiency, looked up. She saw Claire moving toward the main mat, mop in hand, and raised her eyebrows in mild concern. "Can you be done with that in 10? We're starting warm-ups at 7 sharp." Claire nodded once and kept moving. Her footsteps were quiet on the mat. Her eyes scanned for uneven spots, loose tape, stray fibers. Not a single person asked her name. By 6:50, the building had tripled in volume. Bags hit the floor, hugs and greetings overlapped with stretches and last-minute warm-ups. On the far wall, a digital clock ticked toward 7. Claire finished the last pass near the north wall and emptied the mop water without fanfare. She folded the towel once more and placed it beside the bucket. No applause, no acknowledgement. Just clean mats and noise. In a gym full of presences, Claire Martinez left no trace. What none of them knew, what they couldn't see beneath the oversized sweatshirt and the humble silence, was that Claire had once stood where those champions in the photos now hung. Before life took everything away, before she learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is disappear, she had been someone they would have recognized, someone they would have feared. But that was before. Now she was just the woman, with the mop invisible to everyone who mattered. At least, that's what they thought. Claire Martinez lived above a mechanic's shop on the edge of town, in a small one-bedroom with uneven floorboards and a window that didn't close all the way. In the summer, the air smelled faintly of oil and brake dust. In the winter, the radiator clicked and wheezed like it was learning to breathe. She didn't mind. Rent was low, the neighbors left her alone, and the building stayed quiet after sundown. The kitchen was barely wide enough for one person to turn around. Her mornings began with instant coffee and a slice of toast. Always the same mug, always the same chipped plate. There were no decorations on the walls except a single photo by the doorway. It showed her standing in a white gi, smiling, with one arm draped around a taller man with the same sharp eyes, her brother Marcus. They were younger then, fresh from a tournament in Atlanta, medals around their necks and sweat still clinging to their hair. He had passed 4 years earlier. The frame was clean, the glass uncracked, and that was the only thing she ever dusted. Claire didn't own much. A second-hand futon folded into a bed every night. Her closet held just enough clothing to get through a week. Tucked on the bottom shelf beneath a stack of sweatshirts was a neatly folded gi. Beside it sat her black belt, wrapped tight and untouched. She hadn't worn it since the funeral. Not because she stopped training, but because something shifted after she lost him. She still remembered what it felt like to compete at the highest level, to step onto a mat with the roar of a crowd behind her. But those memories stayed folded. With the GI, kept close but no longer part of the life she lived. At night, after the shop below closed and the streets went still, Claire rolled out a mat in the corner of her living room. It was worn thin, the surface faded, and the edges curled slightly. She stretched in silence, moving through drills by memory. Her body remembered what her schedule had forgotten: sprawls, hip escapes, grip transitions. Then the rope came down. From its hook, she climbed slowly, barefoot, her breath controlled and quiet. No clock on the wall, no music, just movement. Sometimes she caught herself in the reflection of the window, shoulders strong, jaw set, muscles working beneath the plain gray fabric of her clothes. The city lights behind her were blurry, the glass fogged from the warmth of her breath. When she sat on the mat after training, legs folded, eyes lowered, she looked almost like she had years ago, before things changed, before the name Martinez meant something to people outside her door. There were reminders, of course. A gold medal from a regional championship rested in a drawer beneath a stack of old paperwork. She hadn't touched it in over a year, not because she was bitter, but because she didn't need the shine. Claire wasn't rebuilding her life. She had already built it, small, simple, and completely her own. She still received emails from old teammates sometimes. A few asked if she'd ever consider teaching again. Most just said they missed her. She never replied, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know what to say. The version of her they remembered didn't quite exist anymore. Each evening ended the same way. Claire folded the mat, hung the rope, and wiped the sweat from her neck with the same towel she'd used the next morning at the gym. She didn't train to stay sharp. She trained because the rhythm of it made sense, because the silence had never been empty. Tomorrow, like every morning for the past 6 months, she would return to Valor Athletics. She would clean their mats, fold their towels, and move through their world like a ghost. They would see her hands, her mop, her quiet efficiency, but they would never see her. It was better that way. Safer. The woman who had once dominated tournaments, who had trained alongside future UFC fighters, who had built a gym with her brother. Before losing everything, that woman lived only in the faded photos and the folded GI. The woman who mopped floors at Valor Athletics was someone else entirely, someone who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being underestimated, someone who was about to remind the world why champions should never forget where they came from. By 7:30, Valor Athletics was in full motion. The front desk had switched from quiet check-ins to managing sponsor reps, last-minute waivers, and phone calls that all started with the word urgent. 2 giant coolers of branded water bottles flanked the entrance. Each towel had been rolled and stacked with precision, bearing the gym's logo stitched in navy blue. Music pulsed from overhead speakers, soft enough to talk over but loud enough to fill the silence between conversations. Every corner of the room buzzed with intent. In the main training area, athletes ran warm-ups in tight lines, jogging between cones and slapping hands with familiar faces. Coaches stood along the wall, arms folded, eyes scanning movement like they were already scoring it. Gym owners leaned near each other, comparing travel logistics and who had brought the most competitors. The air smelled of antiseptic, sweat, and something faintly metallic. At the back edge of the room, Claire Martinez moved without interruption, laying out fresh towels beside the wall rack. She worked quickly, without looking up. Her hands folded with mechanical care, 2 towels at a time. A clipboard leaned against the supply table beside her, scribbled with names she didn't need to read. When one towel slipped off the edge, she caught it mid-fall, refolded it, and kept going. She had already cleaned the mats. Now she was setting. The tools everyone else would use. The voices around her rose and fell, but none of them spoke to her. "He's coming in through the south door," someone said, loud enough to trigger a shift in posture across the room. Heads turned. A ripple of movement passed through the crowd like a current. Stretching paused. Conversations dropped. Phones were pulled from pockets. Claire didn't turn around, but she could feel the change in the room. Reed Thompson stepped into Valor Athletics with the weight of reputation around his shoulders. He wore a fitted black rash guard lined with sponsor logos. His hair was short, trimmed clean along the edges, and his walk carried the slow confidence of someone who expected space to open for him. Behind him came a pair of assistants in matching shirts, one holding a clipboard, the other carrying a duffel bag with custom embroidery. Reed nodded at a few coaches, exchanged half smiles with others, and let the noise build around him like it was part of the show. "That's him," someone whispered near the back wall. "3-time national champ, 8 straight golds. Nobody's even passed his guard since last year." "He trains with that crew out of Miami," another voice added. "The one that does those invite-only Shark Tanks." A third chimed in, breathless. "I heard he submitted a UFC contender last week. Guy was out in less than a minute." Claire moved to the next towel stack, refolding a corner that had come loose. She didn't glance over. Near the center of the room, Reed clapped his hands once and raised his voice. "Appreciate you all being here. This isn't going to be one of those soft clinics. We're going to push hard today. Real rounds, real pressure." Applause broke out immediately. The echo off the walls made the gym feel tighter, more enclosed. Someone whistled. Another shouted, "Let's go, champ!" Reed gave a half smile, gestured toward the mats and added, "But first, let's get loose. We'll do movement drills and positional entries before we start tearing each other up." Laughter followed. Not big or wild, just the knowing chuckles of people eager to be tested. Claire adjusted the last stack of towels and stepped away from the wall. She walked toward the storage closet, her sneakers soft against the edge of the mat. A few competitors moved aside for her, more out of reflex than recognition. Behind her, someone said, "Who is she?" "Haven't seen her around. Probably one of the volunteers. They always pull in extra help for these things. No badge, though. Maybe janitorial." They didn't sound cruel, just casual, like they were commenting on the weather. Claire ducked into the closet and returned with a crate of training bands. As she placed them down near the edge of the mat, one of the assistants called out to her without looking, "Can we get a fresh stack of rash guards for the front rack? 2 sizes each." Claire nodded and walked back toward the office. No one asked. Her name? No one noticed how she moved, how her steps were balanced, how her posture stayed even, how she carried her weight through the hips like someone trained to stay grounded. The warm-up started with partner drills, frames, hip escapes, technical. Stand-ups. Reed wandered between pairs, correcting stances, offering praise when it counted. Phones came back out, snapping pictures of drills. The logo on his back stood out sharp against the white mats. His voice was clear, crisp, practiced. Claire stood at the edge of the mat with a rolled towel in her hands. She watched, not because she needed to, but because her body had already memorized every movement being taught. She leaned her weight to one side, listening to the chatter of athletes around her as they talked about tournaments, upcoming travel, training camps in the desert. Near the bleachers, a gym owner gestured toward Reed and said, "He's the future. Everyone else is just catching up." One of his coaches added, "I'd pay good money to see him handle a blindfolded match. He'd still smoke half this room." They laughed. Again. Claire didn't blink. The clock above the mirrors ticked past 8. Reed clapped his hands a second time and called out, "Let's get a demo up in 5. We'll start with a standard grip break and work into transitions." People moved toward the center. Claire stepped off the mat. No one asked her to stay. What they didn't know, what none of them could see, was that Claire had spent years drilling these exact techniques. She had taught them to students who went on to win nationals. She had perfected them alongside her brother in a gym that no longer existed. As she folded towels and restocked supplies, her mind cataloged every mistake she saw, every missed opportunity, every technique that could be refined. But she said nothing. She was invisible here, and for now, That was exactly where she needed to be. The demonstration was about to begin, and Claire Martinez, the woman they saw as nothing more than hired help, was about to remind everyone why assumptions could be dangerous. The seminar had settled into a rhythm. Reed Thompson stood in the center of the mat, one knee down, hands gesturing through the opening moves of a grip sequence. Around him, athletes circled close, nodding along. His instructions were clear and confident, broken by light humor and casual commentary that kept the group engaged. Everyone watched him, even the instructors. Reed had presence, and he knew it. When he paused, brushing hair back from his forehead, one of the assistant coaches stepped in with a grin. "We need a partner, somebody light and quick, maybe someone who's already warmed up from mopping the floors." Laughter cracked through the room. The coach gestured broadly toward the wall where Claire Martinez stood, holding a clipboard and a folded towel. She had just finished restocking the bands and hadn't made a sound since the warm-ups ended. A few heads turned toward her. The laughter grew louder, sharper. "Come on," someone said near the front. "Let her have a go. Give the cleaning crew some mat time. She's probably better at wiping sweat than breaking grips." Another voice chimed in. "This should be good. Hope someone's recording." Reed smiled, amused, and shrugged. "Sure, let's see what she's got." It was meant to be a joke. Claire understood that before she took a step. But she moved forward anyway, placing the towel on the bench and walking barefoot onto the mat. Her posture didn't change, no awkwardness, no hesitation. She didn't glance at the crowd or shift her weight nervously. She just walked to the center and stood across from Reed. The noise died down slightly, replaced by whispers. "Is she really doing this? She's not serious." "Just going to stand there and smile?" Reed raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly. "You sure you're up for this?" Claire's answer was quiet but clear. "I'll need a blindfold." That stopped everything. A beat passed. Then the laughter came again. Bigger this time, rowdy and full of disbelief. "You what? Did she say blindfold? This is gold. Someone record this." Reed looked at her, amused but curious now. "Blindfold, huh?" Claire nodded. "If we're demonstrating technique, I won't need to see." The tone in the room shifted, not all the way, not yet, but enough that the second row of athletes stopped smiling. A few exchanged looks. One coach, arms folded, narrowed his eyes. Someone tossed a towel from the side of the mat. "Make it dramatic," he called. "We're all about the show here." Claire caught the towel mid-air. Her hands moved smoothly as she folded it into a band. Still silent, still calm. She turned slightly, tied the blindfold around her head, and adjusted the knot behind her ears. Her hair caught the edge of the fabric, a few strands curling along her jawline. She looked almost like she was preparing for a quiet meditation, not a sparring session. Then she reached behind her and untied the drawstring bag that had rested near the edge of the bleachers. From inside she pulled a black belt, faded, worn but tightly wrapped. Without a word she tied it around her waist with practiced motion. Silence fell in full. The laughter stopped. Reed's smile faded just enough to show his confusion. People glanced at each other, unsure of the tone now. It wasn't a joke anymore, or at least it didn't feel like one. "Is that real?" someone whispered. "Where'd she get that belt?" another voice answered low. "Nobody brings one unless it means something." Claire stood straight, hands loose at her sides, feet shoulder-width apart, the blindfold held snug across her eyes. Her breathing was steady, unshaken. Reed cleared his throat, looking around. "All right," he said, trying to bring the energy back up. "Let's keep this friendly, just a grip demo. Nothing heavy." But no, one laughed this time. In the back row, a brown belt leaned forward. His voice was almost a whisper. "I think we're about to see something." The room stilled. The mats that had echoed with jokes and claps just minutes before now held their breath. Claire shifted her stance and waited. What none of them knew, what they couldn't have guessed from her quiet demeanor and cleaning supplies, was that Claire Martinez had spent thousands of hours training blindfolded. It had been her and Marcus's signature drill, something they'd developed together to sharpen their sensitivity to pressure, weight distribution, and timing. She had won 3 regional championships using techniques she'd perfected without sight. She had tapped out black belts who outweighed her by 50 pounds, all while wearing a blindfold that her brother would tie for her before each match. The woman they saw as hired help was about to remind them that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones you never see coming. Reed Thompson thought he was about to give a gentle lesson to an overconfident janitor. What he was actually facing was a former champion who had learned to fight in the dark, and who was about to show him exactly what that meant. The mat was quiet. Claire Martinez stood blindfolded, the black belt tied snugly at her waist. Her bare feet found their stance instinctively. The silence around her wasn't respectful yet. It was uncertain, like the moment before a storm when the wind forgets which direction to blow. Reed Thompson rolled his shoulders back and stepped toward her. His voice was light, but there was a thread of caution buried in it now. "Let's make it clean," he said. "Grip and flow. No need to overdo it." Claire didn't answer. She only adjusted her footing by half an inch and waited. Reed moved first. He stepped in quickly, controlling the collar and sleeve with crisp precision, expecting no resistance, but her balance shifted before he even made full contact. She absorbed the grip like it was wind against her shoulder, spinning just enough to change the angle, forcing him to reset. He blinked, then smirked, and moved again, this time with more weight behind it. She met his pressure with perfect timing. Her hips turned, framing his motion without force. Her hands found control points as if they were drawn by muscle memory. He reached for a trip, but she posted her foot and redirected, slipping past the angle like water folding over stone. A ripple went through the room. Someone whispered, "Wait!" Reed exhaled louder now, shaking out one arm. He shot for a clinch and dropped his weight. Claire dropped too, but faster, cleaner. She underhooked, framed off the hip, and spun into a knee shield. No explosion, no speed, just precision. Her breathing hadn't changed. Reed tried to pressure down. Her legs locked him in place. She reversed and posted her right hand, catching the edge of his elbow and creating a frame that guided him sideways. Where he stumbled half a step, it wasn't dramatic, but the effect was unmistakable. Claire slid under, swept his base, and came up into mount before he even braced. The blindfold stayed firm. She kept one hand on his wrist and the other on the mat beside his head, weight low, posture unshaken. Reed bridged. She flowed with it, letting him turn just enough to bait the escape. As soon as he shifted, she swung to the back. 2 hooks in, seatbelt control locked before he even registered what happened. The gym had stopped breathing. Her legs curled around his waist like vines closing around a tree trunk. Reed's hands went to defense, but her grip was already climbing. She waited just half a second, then slipped her right arm across his neck in a clean rear naked choke. No crank, no rush, just position. She tightened her elbow, adjusted her wrist, and finished. The choke the way a pianist finishes a song, without hesitation. Reed tapped. The sound of it echoed more than any slap on the mat had all morning. Claire released immediately and rolled back, landing softly on her side before sitting upright. Her breathing stayed calm. Her blindfold didn't move. Reed stayed. On the mat, elbows braced, chest rising hard, he didn't speak. Someone at the edge of the gym dropped their water bottle. It hit the floor with a sharp crack. No one turned to look. Claire reached behind her head and untied the blindfold. She didn't rush the movement. The cloth fell into her lap. She folded it once, then again, and set it beside her on the mat. She stood slowly. Reed got to his feet, looking at her but not saying anything. He nodded once. Claire met his eyes without emotion and bowed slightly. Then she stepped off the mat. No one clapped. No one moved. The man who had joked about her mopping didn't speak. The instructor who tossed her the towel said nothing. People stood like they had forgotten how to sit. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling vent and the slow buzz of the exit sign light. Claire walked across the mat the same way she had. Earlier, quiet even, deliberate. This time, no one looked away. Near the benches, a young brown belt turned to a nearby coach and whispered, "Who is she?" The coach didn't answer right away. He squinted like trying to bring a memory into focus. Then he said, "That's Claire Martinez." "Martinez?" Someone nearby turned. "Didn't she used to run a gym out east?" Another voice added. "Her brother died," the coach replied quietly. "They ran it together. After he passed, she just disappeared. Nobody's seen her on the circuit since." A few others nodded slowly. Pieces clicked into place. The tone in the room had shifted again, this time not from silence to awe, but from uncertainty to recognition. It wasn't just that she had choked out Reed, it was that they had forgotten her. One of the seminar organizers stepped forward, clearing his throat before speaking. "Claire, would you be willing to stay and coach a segment?" His voice was respectful, now his posture more formal than before. "Or even come back next week. The instructors would be lucky to have you." Claire looked at him briefly. Her answer was simple. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm just here to clean mats." It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't smug. She said it like it was still true, and in some way, it was. Reed finally stood. He walked toward her slowly at first, then with purpose. When he reached her, he paused, hands at his sides. "You made your point," he said. His voice was quiet. There was no smile this time, no edge in the delivery. Claire looked at him, not with challenge, not with judgment, just level and calm. "That wasn't the point," she said. He nodded once, then extended his hand. She took it briefly, then released. A few students who had laughed earlier now looked at the floor. Others exchanged glances without speaking. The loudest instructor from before stood with his arms crossed, no longer grinning, unsure what to do with his hands. Someone picked up the water bottle that had been dropped earlier and set it gently on the bench, as if the sound it made had been too loud for the moment. The space had changed, not the walls or the mats or the light, but the tone. The air in Valor Athletics felt heavier, like something important had taken place and no one had quite figured out what to do with it yet. Claire walked back toward the towel rack. She picked up the one she'd folded earlier and wiped the sweat from her neck. She placed it neatly in her bag, then untied her belt and folded it the same way she had every night at home. No one dared interrupt. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. As she stepped past the edge of the mat, one of the younger athletes moved aside instinctively, not with fear, but with reverence. He glanced down at her belt, then looked away, humbled. Someone near. The office door murmured, "She was here the whole time and we never saw her," and that was the truth. The seminar wound down slowly, like a fire that took time to fade. Even as the drills ended and mats were rolled up, the conversations never left the center. Claire Martinez had become the unspoken center of every glance, every whisper. Coaches huddled near the benches, discussing what they had just seen. A few approached her carefully, some with humility, others with tentative ambition. "We'd love to have you as a guest instructor next month," one said, his voice pitched low, almost apologetic. Another offered to sponsor private sessions, travel, accommodations. "We could put your name on the flyer. People would come just to see you move." Claire nodded politely, then declined. Not coldly, not dismissively, just clearly. She offered thanks each time, and then stepped back. She answered every compliment with stillness and every invitation with the same calm refusal. It wasn't that she didn't value the offers, it was that she didn't need them. By the time she left Valor Athletics, the sun was low and the sidewalks were tinted gold. She wore the same plain hoodie, the same gray sweatpants. Her duffel bag was light, no medals, no trophies, just a folded belt and a clean towel. She walked the long way home, past the industrial warehouses, the corner laundromat, and the row of fenced-in lots where old cars sat waiting for repairs. She turned down a quieter street near a community park. Across from the swings and the broken fountain there was a small jiu-jitsu school. No sign on the door, just a white banner in the window, and 2 fluorescent lights humming above the mats. Inside, a group of kids in white belts were finishing. Drills. One girl near the front struggled with the mechanics of a rear choke. Her arms were crossed too high, her hips too flat. Claire paused outside the glass. She didn't go in, she didn't wave. She simply raised her hand and mimed the adjustment. One arm lower, elbow tucked, weight off the shoulder. The girl looked up, noticed the stranger standing outside, and mirrored the motion. Her instructor turned, saw her fix it, and nodded with a smile. Claire gave the girl a small nod, then turned and kept walking. The sidewalks grew emptier as she moved through her neighborhood. Her building came into view, faded paint, cracked. Step, and the familiar sound of a mechanic's playlist leaking through the wall below. She climbed the narrow staircase and unlocked the door with the key that stuck slightly, unless you turned it just right. Inside, nothing had changed. Claire set her bag on the counter, pulled off her hoodie, and washed her hands in the small kitchen sink. The water ran hot for a few seconds, then settled into a lukewarm trickle. She didn't seem to notice. After drying off with the same towel she'd used at the seminar, she walked into the living room and opened the closet. Her gi was still folded on the bottom shelf. She lifted it carefully, then placed it on the futon and sat down beside it. Her black belt, still warm from her bag, rested across her knees. She looked at it without touching it, her eyes steady, her posture relaxed. It didn't need to be worn to hold meaning. After a moment she stood and unrolled her training mat, the corners still curled at the edges. The rope hung from the hook where it always had, the fibers frayed but strong. Claire stepped onto the mat barefoot, her stance measured, her breathing deep and quiet. She didn't start with drills. Not yet. She stood in the center of the mat, arms at her sides, and let the silence settle. The room held no crowd, no music, no praise. Just a radiator ticking in the wall and the steady rhythm of her own breath. Then she moved, simple transitions, shifts of weight, a slide into a guard pass, a smooth motion into side control. Each movement was deliberate, not to prove anything, not to repeat what had happened that morning, but because this was how she stayed whole. This was how she remained herself. Outside, the world moved on. Traffic lights blinked, street lights buzzed, someone shouted across the alley. But in her room, time was slower, cleaner. Claire didn't check the time. She didn't count reps. When she stopped, she sat back on her heels and folded the GI again. She placed the belt across the fabric and left them on the futon. She didn't need applause. She didn't need a spotlight. That wasn't why she trained, and that was never why she returned. The seminar room at Valor Athletics had been swept, cleared, and mostly forgotten by the time the last coach zipped up his bag. Mats had been disinfected. The water cooler was half empty. Folding chairs leaned against the wall in quiet rows. Yet something still hovered in the air, a stillness no one dared break. Near the back corner, where Claire Martinez had stacked towels earlier that morning, one remained folded, clean, untouched. A student noticed it on the bench, hesitated, then walked it over to the mop bucket she had left beside the supply closet. He didn't say anything. He just placed it there carefully like a token laid at the edge of a monument. Nobody touched it after that. The gym didn't speak of her, not out loud, but every person who had stood on the mat that morning walked out, differently, humbled, changed. Reed Thompson remained behind a little longer, standing near the center of the mat. His hands were on his hips, his head lowered slightly. The ring of sweat where he had tapped out had dried, but the memory hadn't. A few coaches lingered nearby, waiting for some kind of wrap-up. Reed looked up at them, then down at the mat again. His voice was softer now, without edge or force. "We came here to teach pressure," he said. "Turns out we were the ones under it." No one responded. They just nodded, and then they left. Word spread quickly through the jiu-jitsu community. By evening, phone calls were being made. Social media. Posts appeared and disappeared just as fast. Videos taken during the warm-ups, blurry shots of a woman in a blindfold, whispered accounts of what had happened. But no one had captured the moment itself. The choke had been too sudden. The silence. Too heavy. The only evidence was the memory burned into 40 witnesses who couldn't quite believe what they'd seen. At a gym across town, an instructor pulled up old tournament footage on his laptop. Martinez, he muttered, scrolling through results from 5 years earlier. I knew that name sounded familiar. The video showed a younger Claire, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, stepping onto a tournament mat with quiet confidence. Her opponent was bigger, more aggressive, with a reputation for overwhelming pressure. The match lasted 90 seconds. Claire absorbed every attack, redirected every assault, and finished with the same rear-naked choke she'd used that morning. The crowd in the video went wild. The camera caught her face as she stood, calm, focused, almost serene. She was supposed to be the next big thing, the instructor said to his assistant. Then she just vanished. Similar conversations were happening in gyms from coast to coast. Old-timers pulled out faded photos, scrolled through archived forums, made calls to training partners they hadn't spoken to in years. The story began to take shape. Claire and Marcus Martinez had opened their gym in a small industrial town 3 hours east of the city. They'd trained together since childhood, developed their own system, produced champions. She was the technical genius. He was the promoter, the face of the operation. Then Marcus was killed in a car accident on his way back from a tournament. Claire closed the gym 6 months later, sold everything, disappeared from competition entirely. I heard she blamed herself, one coach told another over the phone. Marcus was driving back with her medals. She'd stayed behind to teach a kid's class. Survivor's guilt, another added. That happens to a lot of athletes when they lose someone close. But none of them understood the full truth. Claire hadn't quit because she was broken. She'd quit because she was angry at the politics, at the egos, at the way the sport had become about everything except the art itself. Marcus had been the buffer between her and all of that. Without him, she'd seen too clearly what the jiu-jitsu world really was, a place where talent was measured by social media followers, where respect was earned through trash talk and promotional deals. So she'd walked away, found the smallest job in the industry she could, cleaning mats at seminars, restocking towels, emptying trash cans. She'd made herself invisible in the one place she'd once been most visible. It was her own form of rebellion, her own way of staying connected to the art while rejecting everything else that came with it. At Valor Athletics, the owner sat in his office, staring at the registration sheet from that morning. Claire's name was written in plain block letters. At the bottom, under support staff. No credentials listed, no background check. Just a phone number and an address. He'd hired her 6 months ago when his regular cleaning service had gotten too expensive. She'd shown up on time every day since, worked without complaint, never asked for anything extra. Now he realized he'd been paying one of the most dangerous grapplers in the state minimum wage to mop his floors. His phone rang. It was another gym owner from 2 states over. "I heard something interesting happened at your seminar today," the voice said. "It's something about a janitor who tapped out Reed Thompson." "Where did you hear that?" "Word travels fast in this community. Is it true?" The owner looked out his window at the empty parking lot. "It's true." "What's her name?" "Claire Martinez." A long pause. "The Claire Martinez from the Martinez Brothers Academy?" "I guess so." "Jesus Christ. Do you know what you have there? Do you know who she is?" The owner was beginning to understand. "I'm starting to. She won every major tournament on the East Coast for 3 years straight, submitted everyone they put in front of her. Then she just vanished. People have been looking for her for years. She's been mopping my floors? Not anymore, she hasn't." The following Monday, Claire Martinez arrived at Valor Athletics at 6:30 a.m., just like always. She parked her beat-up Honda in the same spot, gathered her cleaning supplies from the trunk, and walked toward the entrance with the same unhurried pace she'd maintained for 6 months. But something was different. 3 cars were already in the parking lot, their occupants sitting inside, waiting. As she approached the front door, one car door opened, then another. A young woman stepped out first, maybe 25, wearing a crisp jai with a brown belt tied at her waist. "Excuse me," she said, her voice respectful but eager. "Are you Claire Martinez?" Claire paused, hand on the door handle. "Yes?" "I drove 4 hours to meet you. I was at the tournament in Atlanta where you submitted Jessica Chen in the finals. You probably don't remember, but I was in the crowd. I was 16, just started training. Watching you compete, it changed everything for me." Claire studied the young woman's face. She did remember that tournament, the energy in the crowd, the way the entire arena had gone silent during the final moments of the match. "What's your name?" Claire asked. "Rebecca Walsh. I teach at a small gym about 3 hours north of here. We specialize in working with kids who've been through trauma. Jiu-jitsu as therapy." Claire nodded slowly. "That's good work. I was hoping, I know this might sound crazy, but would you consider visiting sometime? Not to teach a seminar or anything formal, just to train with us. The kids would benefit so much from seeing someone like you." Before Claire could answer, the second car door opened. An older man stepped out, maybe 60, with graying hair and calloused hands. He approached slowly, almost reverently. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Tom Bradford. I was Marcus's first coach, back when you two were just kids. I've been looking for you since the funeral." Claire's expression softened slightly. "Coach Bradford, I should have reached out sooner, should have checked on you after—" He trailed off, then started again. "I heard about what happened yesterday, about the seminar. It wasn't supposed to be about proving anything. I know. That's exactly why it mattered." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came for you at the old gym. The mail kept getting forwarded to me for a while. I've been holding on to it for 3 years. Claire took the letter. The return address read, International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation. Her hands were steady as she opened it. Inside was a formal invitation to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Her name was listed alongside legends of the sport, pioneers who had shaped jiu-jitsu into what it had become. "They've been trying to reach you," Coach Bradford said gently. "The ceremony was 2 years ago. You were inducted anyway, in absentia. But they'd like you to accept the honor in person at this year's event." Claire read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. "I'll think about it." The third car door opened. Reed Thompson stepped out, no longer wearing sponsor gear or carrying himself with championship swagger. He looked like what he was, a talented athlete, who'd been humbled and was trying to figure out what that meant. "I hope you don't mind," he said as he approached. "I asked around, found out when you usually arrive." "Why?" Claire asked simply. "Because I wanted to apologize. Not for losing, that's part of the game, but for the way everyone treated you. Before they knew who you were, the jokes, the assumptions, I was part of that." Claire considered this. "You weren't cruel." "No, but I wasn't paying attention either. I should have seen how you moved, how you carried yourself. A real martial artist would have noticed." "What would you have done differently?" Reed thought about it. "I would have asked your name, for—" The first time in the conversation, Claire smiled, just slightly, just enough to soften the edges of her face. "My name is Claire Martinez," she said. "I used to compete. Now I clean mats. Both things are true." Reed nodded. Would you be willing to train with me sometime? Not as a seminar or a publicity thing, just to learn." Claire looked at all three of them, Rebecca with her earnest hopefulness, Coach Bradford with his patient understanding, Reed with his newfound humility. For 6 months she'd moved through the jiu-jitsu world invisible, forgotten, dismissed. Now these people saw her clearly, but more importantly, they saw the art the way she did, as something pure, something worth pursuing for its own sake, rather than for fame or recognition. "There's a small gym about 10 minutes from here," she said finally. "Kids program mostly, but they have open mat on Wednesday nights. Nothing fancy, no cameras, no social media, just training." "That sounds perfect," Rebecca said. "I'll be there," Reed added. Coach Bradford smiled. "Marcus would be proud." Claire unlocked the front door of Valor Athletics and held it open for them. "I have work to finish here first, but after that—" She paused, looking back at the place where everything had changed. "After that, maybe it's time to step back onto the mat." As they walked inside together, Claire realized something had shifted. She was still the same person who'd chosen invisibility over recognition, who'd found peace in simple work and quiet training. But she was also someone who could bridge those two worlds, the champion she'd been and the teacher she was becoming. The mats still needed to be cleaned, towels still needed to be folded, but now those tasks felt less like hiding and more like preparation, getting ready for whatever came next. 3 hours later, when the first athletes began arriving for morning classes, they found something unexpected. Reed Thompson, one of the most dominant competitors in the sport, helping a quiet woman in gray sweatpants finish mopping the last section of mats. Neither of them spoke. They just worked together in comfortable silence, two martial artists doing what needed to be done. When they finished, Reed bowed slightly. Claire returned the gesture. Then she gathered her supplies, slung her bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the exit. At the door, she turned back one more time. The gym was filling with students now, young and old, beginners and experts, all of them stepping onto clean mats to pursue the same art that had shaped her life. Some would compete, some would teach, some would simply train for the joy of movement, for the meditation of struggle, for the quiet satisfaction of improvement. All of them mattered. All of them belonged. Claire Martinez stepped outside into the morning sunlight, no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. She had reminded the world that champions come in many forms. Some wear gold medals, some wear cleaning uniforms, and the best ones know that the title matters less than the journey. That Wednesday night she would return to the mat not as a janitor or a champion, but as what she'd always been. A student of the art, ready to learn and teach in equal measure. The story spread through the jiu-jitsu community, not as gossip or spectacle, but as a reminder. In a sport often consumed by ego and politics, Claire Martinez had shown them something pure. That true mastery isn't about being seen. It's about seeing clearly, moving with purpose, and never forgetting why you started. She had tapped out more than just a champion that day. She had tapped out the assumptions that keep people from recognizing greatness in unexpected places, and in doing so, she had found her way home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.